and welcome back to the Be More Connected Summit. I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected, and today I am here with the incredible Elissa Weinzimmer. Hi, Elissa.
Hi, Elise. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And Elissa is a vocal health educator, presence coach, and the founder of Voice Body Connection. After suddenly losing her voice at the age of 21, Elissa stopped performing and began studying the mechanics of voice. Over time, she developed a unique, concrete approach for coaching that empowers performers, leaders, and speakers to optimize their voices and share them more authentically. Elissa's clients include Broadway stars, television personalities, politicians, and CEOs. She's coached for Equinox, WeWork, Microsoft, eBay, and various cultural centers and universities and colleges. And Elissa is based in New York City and is currently working on her first book.
It's all accurate.
So much incredible work, and I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with you here. But I'd love to start with a little check-in as to where you are in the world right now and how you are holding up during this transformational time.
Thanks, Elise. I'm here in Brooklyn. In my home with my dog, Ernie, who's actually very close by. Ernie, do you want to say hi to everyone?
He's right here.
Ernie and I are, this is my germ squad. Yep, yep, and it is germy. So I'm here in Brooklyn. I grew up in California and my parents are in the East Bay, not too far from San Francisco. But my brother and sister and I all live in Brooklyn, about like 20 minutes max walking apart. So I've got my crew.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm okay. You know, there are definitely sirens that come up and down the streets. I live on like a slightly more major street. So I hear sirens. We might hear a siren. Yeah, just doing my best. I have a friend in the neighborhood who I do grocery shopping for who's immunocompromised, and like that makes me feel like I can be of service. And I go out in my mask when I walk him, and
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I'm glad that you're holding up well, and that you're being able to stay connected with family and community during this time. So important.
Mm-hmm.
And I love to ask our guests to share a bit of their backstory. I know I already read your formal bio, but if you can share a bit about your own journey of healing and what's gotten you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So, like if I could tattoo a word across my forehead, I've thus far decided not to, but if I could, it would be, it would be the word voice. Like that really identifies who I am. Like I am a student and a teacher and a scholar and a lifelong evolver around the concept of voice. And And lately, the way that I tell my story has actually been evolving. It's been changing. Growing up, like when I was really young, I just wanted to perform. Like I just kind of, sometimes my joke is I came out of my mother's womb tap dancing, which is probably was uncomfortable for her. And the truth is like, tap dancing is not necessarily like my forte. I was actually a ballerina growing up in addition to doing a lot of musical theater. But yeah, I just like performing is like very much in my blood, and something that in my own process of like continuing to more deeply reclaim my own voice over the course of time that I've come to remember is that when I was 9 years old-ish, in elementary school, I used to spend my recesses on the playground, like sitting back in like a remote corner of the field, chanting and writing songs.
Wow.
These really simple spiritual songs. And and then I got, like pulled into music classes and musical theater classes, and I really loved that. But what happened was I got taught like the right way to sing and the right types of songs to sing.
Sure.
Which were all very, like choral or musical theater or pop to some degree. And I got good at that, and I excelled in that all through high school and college until at age 21, I was pushing so hard to excel that the essential story of what happened is I was on an a cappella retreat with my group for the weekend. Yes, it basically was like the movie Pitch Perfect. and and I was singing What a Feeling from Flashdance was my solo. So I was like scream belting What a
Oh yeah.
Feeling over and over and over on a weekend that I had laryngitis, that I had been pushing myself. It was my final semester of college, so academically I was really pushing myself, and I had a vocal hemorrhage. I was drinking a lot at the time, so I had severe onset of acid reflux at the same time, which exacerbated the whole thing, probably caused the hemorrhage. And my muscles seized up. So I had what then became like an ongoing case of muscle tension dysphonia, even though I only ever heard those words much later. So yeah, I mean, you know, at some point I'm going to probably change my bio because the story has been that I stopped performing and that I started like studying and teaching and coaching, but I'm starting to perform again more. And the performing that wants to come out of me is like very similar to what the 9-year-old girl on the playground wanted to sing. So yeah, it's like very full circle, and it's feeling really good. So I'm starting to share more of that lately with my friends and family. And I'm also going to start inviting my community and my clients to sing and chant with me. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Such a powerful story. And
Thank you.
I love that connection and that alignment to the younger childhood Elissa, who
Yeah.
was so deeply connected to her soul and this and the way that she wanted to use her voice, and now being able to presence that and bring that to the forefront is, wow, I'm sure, like so incredibly nourishing and healing.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, it's yeah, there's been like a lot of all the waves of emotion. There's been like a lot of tears and a lot of like screaming and beating pillows, which it's a really good time for all of us to be doing that and letting it out if we need to right now.
Emotional release, right?
Yeah, like there's been like all the just to like, because really truly I think I'm sure there must be many of your guests on the summit saying that I think the true pathway to becoming more connected with our soul and our inner child and our whole self is actually a process of peeling away layers, as opposed to like finding our way back to something that's not there. It's there. It's just
1,000%.
like, yeah, peeling it away, peeling it away.
Ooh, yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think that that is such a resonant theme throughout this series is how do we actually connect back to our soul selves and allow ourselves to live more from that place. And it's not easy work. It's really can be really challenging, confronting work, but so worth it. And I'd also love
Yes.
to dive a little bit deeper into so for people who are seeking to find their authentic voice and speak their truth, where do you recommend that they begin?
It's a good question. Um, Lately, I've been thinking about our voice as this really interesting paradox, because I can say, Elise, you have a voice, and I could mean by that that you have vocal cords and a throat through which air flows that sets the vocal folds into motion.
Sure.
Cords folds, same thing. You have articulators, you have a tongue that shapes the sounds. Like I could mean all of that, but I also could mean, Elise, you have a voice, like you have a message, you have a voice in this world. I could mean the
Mm,
metaphorical voice. And I think one nice way to think about those two ways of describing our voice is as the container and also the contents.
yes.
So your voice is both the pipe, so-called pipe through which the water flows, and it's also the water flowing through the pipe, right?
Beautiful.
So when someone asks where to start, the answer is like where you are, and also anywhere, because for someone who feels like they don't have access to their voice in terms of like ahem, it literally hurts to make sound, like I'm clearing my throat all the time, kind of like the situation I wound up in when I was 21, then it may actually, the first practical step may be to take some pressure off the vocal folds, to practice breathing in a way that truly excites the vocal cords into motion gently without pressure. that may be a really good first step for someone. Whereas for someone else, a great first step is focusing on those contents, on the energy that's flowing through. And, you know, and if we go back to this pipe metaphor, if there's like sludgy, toxic goop flowing through your pipes, like, don't you think at a
Mm,
certain point that's going to like build up on the inside of the pipes, like start corroding them, make things like kind of not work very well? So
right.
if we are spouting lies, and, you know, right now, I'm sure it's probably fine at this point for me to be relatively radical in what I'm saying and say, like, the people in our government are spouting lies.
Hmm.
We are becoming really more deeply acquainted than we've ever been with the fact that the media has a system based on trying to get our eyeballs on the news. So it's sensationalized, which is a version of a lie, you know, which is a version of like not the deepest level of truth that could be being shared.
Right. Playing
Um,
on our fears.
yeah, exactly. Like basically fear-based instead of love-based.
Mhm.
And then another version of spouting lies could simply be, and this is actually something that I've been doing a lot of cleanup around personally in the last couple of weeks, is if I overextend myself with some of my best friends, like I pick up the phone when I don't actually have the capacity to really listen to them right now,
Sure.
like suddenly I can't sustain that anymore. I've actually had to have conversations with multiple best friends recently being like, hey, I'm maxed out. I can't show up for you very well right now because I need to take care of myself. I'm sure a lot of us are in this process.
Right.
And so me picking up the phone and acting like I have the capacity when in fact I don't is a version of lying,
Mm,
actually, you know? So in yoga, we sometimes say that the throat chakra is, you know, all about truth and expression and all the things we're talking about. The shadow side of that is lies. So, like lies in their most expansive definition, all the way from Trump's literally lying to us to I wasn't honest with my friend about not being able to really talk right now. Um, so, if we're working on the contents, then the useful thing to do is to um, clean up our lies and
yes.
speak our truth. And how do we speak our truth? Well, how do we know our truth? I call my business voice body connection because your body is your instrument for your voice. And the work that I teach is very somatic, it's very body based and trauma informed, even. And so for us to come back to our bodies and like acknowledge truly what's going on in our bodies is a beautiful starting point. So actually, really, I guess this is a long-winded way of saying come back to your body, and your
Yes.
body will tell you what your voice wants to say. And I'm happy to share more specifically about a process that I use to help people find the pathway from body up through voice as well, if you want to go in that direction.
Sure. I think I would love to go in that direction and just
Okay.
want to highlight um, some of the elements of what you shared that I found to be so powerful and so supportive. And that piece around being truthful, I think, is something that we may fall into some sticky places in our relationships with other people around really being able to honor that. Like the example that you gave, I think was so powerful of even when we are thinking that we may be trying to do something positive and showing up for our friends and showing up in our relationships, if we know within ourselves that we actually don't have the energy and we don't have the capacity for that, wow, that's a form of lying. So I think that's something for everyone to just be getting curious about. Where are we really showing up in a real authentic way so that we're supporting and nourishing our voice versus depleting it?
Mm, hmm hmm And again, we can go back to that idea that it's a process of peeling things away because, like, what is the thought in my brain that goes, I have to call my best friend back right now because she needs me? It's a, what I would call that is it's a script. It's
Yes.
something I learned. It's something I heard externally at some point and came to believe as true when in
Mm,
fact it's not my truth in the moment.
1000%.
And when we're in the very uncomfortable process of starting to like even be able to acknowledge and hear that we're following a script, which
Mm,
is like whoa, and then to start like paying attention to how we might act differently, that can be incredibly uncomfortable. And the whole planet is currently uncomfortable anyway.
Oh
So
yeah.
like we have to be gentle with ourselves and have so much compassion and give ourselves a lot of leeway to recognize the really subtle ways in which we are polluting our throat chakra with our maybe misalignments is a nice word for it instead of lies, if we don't want to use that word, but with our misalignments. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I was chatting with someone the other day, and I love that you emphasize this point that this time is really calling on us to expand our kindness
Mm-hmm.
and really check our expectations, because everyone is going through so much internally and externally. There's so much that's coming up. So,
Yeah.
yes, being honest with ourselves. Yes, looking at the places where we are misaligned, but also having that grace and compassion to pair with it as well is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Um, so I guess I can share a little bit more about the pathway from body to voice, like we were saying, if that feels useful.
Yes, that sounds
And this will
awesome.
be connected to the free gift that I offer too at the end. So I created a process that I call How to Speak Your Truth. And I really like how to's. Like I've just always been the person who wants to like help people because, you know, a lot of
Yeah.
times we hear like someone that we consider to be wise say like, well, all you have to do is just let go of your attachments and then everything you'll be free. And it's like, I'm the person in the audience going, yes, but how?
How do we do this?
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, but how? Can you please give me a step-by-step guide to how to let go of my attachments? And so, so my brain likes to create those step-by-step guides. So here's a step-by-step guide, and I'll talk us through it at the same time that we do it. So step number one in this 7-step How to Speak Your Truth process is to tune into your sensations. So ask yourself, what is the strongest sensation I feel in my body right now? What's loudest, right? And for instance, for me right now, I'm actually feeling a little bit of tension between my shoulder blades.
Mm.
That's the first thing I noticed. So step number two would be, and you guys can obviously notice all of this as we go through as well. Step
Oh
number
yeah.
two would be, it's almost, in step number two, we back up and we ask ourselves about the stimulus. So what's my
Mm.
thought about why I think that's occurring? So, and usually we kind of get information about this pretty quickly all at once. So my thought is actually, I was sitting up in, talk about a script, I was sitting up in good posture, that's not a thing.
Mm.
And actually it was kind of putting some pressure on my back. So now I'm like, okay, let me like, you know, settle in
Yeah,
and
work
move
it out.
around. Uh-huh. And actually I think it was also my sweaters behind me sort of sending me into a weird posture.
Yeah.
So that's my thought about the sensation. Third step is my emotion. So what are my emotions about noticing all of this? My emotions are, there was probably a flash where I had some frustration about like,
Mm.
Alyssa, you know better than to try to be in good posture.
Mm.
But also gratitude for noticing it comes up as well.
Mm.
Um, And then the fourth step is to name my desire. And in fact, my desire came so quickly that it was to adjust my
Adjust it.
posture so
Yeah.
that I can sit in a way that feels good. Um, so those are the four steps that help me understand my truth. And then the interesting thing is usually we have to be very internal as we pay attention to those four steps. I've obviously been explaining them to you this whole time, but the fifth step would be to make the transition, to take like a pause moment where I make the transition into being like, right, Elise is in front of me, at least virtually. And now it's my job to step 6, express this to her so that
Mm.
step 7, we can communicate back and forth with each other.
Powerful.
Yeah. So if I actually like, let's say that like I was like, Elise, press pause on the recording because my truth was I'm really uncomfortable. I'm sitting in a weird position.
Right, right, right.
I felt this like thing in my back. I'm just going to readjust. Can you pause for a second? Like that might be me expressing my truth.
Sure.
And then the communication I imagine on your side might be something like, no problem, Melissa, go ahead and readjust.
100%.
Right. I choose something benign to talk us through the process
Mm.
because it's just easier to do it with something like that where we have at least hopefully less emotions about, you know, I mean, I know a lot of us can still be really good about like shaming ourselves into posture things,
Yeah, that's also
if you,
true.
right,
Yeah.
but if you think about doing this with something more extreme, like someone just, you know, told you that you offended them,
Mm.
right? it's not easy, but once we get practiced at this, we might be able to, in that moment, because a script we might follow if someone says, that was super offensive, you're an asshole. It's okay that I swear.
Oh yeah, that's good.
A script we might follow might have this spewing out of our mouth. We might go, well, you're an asshole, or we might go like, I didn't mean to offend you. That's one of the classic ones that
For
obviously
sure.
we have a lot of conversations about in social justice communities, is like, great, thank you for, spouting your intentions at me, but it doesn't change the fact that you hurt me,
The
right?
impact, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times we would spew something that's like more of a script type energy
Hmm.
or defense, right?
Yeah.
When in fact, if I had the capacity in that moment when someone said, you just offended me, to feel the churning in my gut,
Mm.
name that it's probably because I just got accused of offending someone, feel the emotion of guilt and self-judgment and regret and like the whole cocktail of emotions that might be happening in a moment like that. And then maybe genuinely notice my desire to set things right. Maybe instead what comes out of my mouth of, well, I wasn't trying to hurt you.
Mm.
Maybe what comes out of my mouth instead is, oh my gosh, I feel so awful. I did hurt you. It's my desire to make things right.
Mm.
I'm sorry, like, um,
And that's
yeah.
transformational, like really being able to
Mm-hmm.
speak from that truthful, compassionate place.
Yeah.
Super vulnerable, super
Yeah.
challenging. But how
Yeah.
can we expand our capacity to be able to communicate that way?
Right. But we can start by doing it with our posture and like more benign things so that we like, get used to the process and we can do
Get
it faster.
comfortable. Yes.
But yeah, and there's just one more thing I'll say too, because with the more extreme, the more difficult example that I just gave,
Yeah.
also, it is really important, in my opinion, for us to have an embodied experience of our lives. But that's often the part that it's often information for us that we can leave out when we're sharing with others. Because
Mm.
another thing that we obviously also talk about a lot in social justice conversations is uncentering ourselves from the conversation.
Right.
Like, there's a little bit of a paradox for me to say, like, have your voice, but also decenter your voice. Like, especially me as a cis white woman, there are a lot of circumstances where I do want to decenter my voice, even though I'm the voice coach, right?
Sure, sure, sure.
So how do I center someone else's voice and uncenter my voice? Maybe the churning in my guts is something I notice for me
Mm.
that gives me the information to let me know how badly I feel. But all that's really necessary for me to say out loud is, I'm so sorry.
Yes. And I think that noticing and that conscious awareness is part of our process of our own evolution as leaders and change makers, because wow, there is so much nuance and complexity and paradox, as you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
in navigating the different environments and the spaces that we're moving through. So how do we still show up in a way that is speaking our truth and is compassionate, but doesn't continue to further or reinforce existing structures or systems that can be having a negative, harmful impact on others?
Yeah.
And I think that really is all of our work in this time, is getting really, really clear on who we are, what we stand for, what we believe, how we want to make an impact in the world, and then figuring out how to use our voice in the most aligned and meaningful way that also is not causing any harm.
Yeah.
Right?
I have total chills hearing you say that. Yeah. Because it can't be all one or the other. And like, I do think like all good things are a paradox, really. I'm sure that so much of what you're focusing on in this summit is self-care and self-acknowledgement and self-compassion and all of these things. Like, we can't skip that part. It would be spiritual bypass for me to be like, I'm going to be the most amazing activist in the world and I'm going to deny myself my self-care and go out and just fight for everything. Like, if
Recipe for
my
burnout.
yeah, exactly. I mean, our communities have been having this conversation more impactfully for the last number of years that I've seen.
Mm,
But I think more and more of us understand that that form of activism is unsustainable.
mhm,
Um, but for us to, part of the reason we give ourselves oxygen, like part of the reason we put on our own oxygen mask first, is so that when we are called to speak, called to lead, called to step into a situation where we are needed, we are taken care of so we can
mm,
show up for others. Um, and just to bring in another framework that is also really helpful for thinking about like in what ways is my voice needed right now and how much is necessary to say.
mm.
There's something really simple, but I always come back to it. It's the Buddhist gates of speech, the four gates of speech,
Yes.
which is it true? We've obviously gone deeply into that one. You have a whole system now for understanding if it's true.
Mm,
Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And kind means both to yourself and others. And is
important.
it the right time?
Mm,
And so that's often what, and there's also, I like to cite Marshall Rosenberg's work, Nonviolent Communication, which also helps us have a framework for understanding what's necessary to say and what's not.
mm,
But yeah, something may be your truth, but it's just not kind. It's not the right time. It's not necessary.
right,
And then we don't need to say it.
right.
We
And then,
know it. We don't have to say it.
yes. And I think being able to be grounded in principles like those can be so supportive when we are beginning to step onto this path of exploring how to speak our truth and knowing that that doesn't mean full disclosure at all times, right? Like
Exactly. That's one of my
there,
favorite questions. I got this really funny email at one point from like a potential client who was like, I would join your Speak Your Truth community, Elissa, but I don't think my people around me need me speaking my truth more than I already do because it's already
ah,
like pretty intense for them. And I was like, huh, I hear you. I hear you. You know what I mean? So it's like, any self-care connection soul practice that we're going to do that we do, hopefully I believe like the good practices will understand that everything's paradoxical in nature. So one
mhm,
person might need to be led back to center through withdrawing a little bit, whereas someone else might need to be led to center by like bringing themselves forward, right?
right. And acknowledging that there is no one size fits all, that we are all so incredibly unique and need to be able to approach these things with different tools and modalities to get us into more of that alignment that you were speaking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I love the way that you connect speaking about our voice to presence and
Mm.
embodiment and getting into a space of vibrational alignment and authenticity. And I was wondering if you could share a bit more about that with this audience.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like as entrepreneurs, like I love naming things
Mm,
and my background is in theater, if that's not already readily apparent.
right.
I mean, I talked about that anyway, but so coming from that world, like a lot of voice teachers call themselves voice and speech teachers. Sometimes like there's like the adjacent world of presentation coaching. And I was like, I do all these things, but I was trying to think like what I wanted to call myself. And I settled on calling myself a voice and presence coach,
Mm-hmm.
presence in all senses of the word. Yeah, that feels really apt to me because our voice and our presence are so interconnected. Like if I'm not present, if I'm not connected to my own experience, then how do I, how does it come through me in this moment and as true?
Right.
So, I mean, look around you wherever you are. I like just looked across the street at the buildings across the street. Every form of matter you see around you is vibration. And I sound like a meditation teacher when I say that, but I also sound like a quantum physicist because this is science, right? Like
It's
we know
scientific.
that like this curtain is vibration. Matter is vibration. So part of my philosophical studies are in Vedic philosophy, in like what precedes Buddhism and Hinduism, and in Vedic philosophy, there's this concept of Shiva and Shakti, which is the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, like a way to describe the Big Bang, if you will, is that we were in this like formless, like maybe call it goop if you want, but it was like formlessness and spaciousness,
Yes.
which is the
Okay.
Shiva element, which is the masculine element. And then out of that Shakti, bang, matter came to be. And Shakti is the form, Shakti is the matter, Shakti is the sound, Shakti is the frequency, Shakti is the vibration. And so everything we experience as form is actually vibration, which means it's actually sound.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it may sound like woo woo to say, like, raise your vibration. But I think what that phrase is referring to is there is a frequency at which universal intelligence would have you vibrate. And one of my favorite ways into understanding that is astrology.
Yes.
Some people, and I know yours too, and like some people may have different ways of understanding, like, what is my essential frequency as a form, as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a frequency at which universal intelligence would have you vibrate, at which consciousness would have you vibrate. And when you are covered over with all those layers of crapola, you're not at the vibration where universal intelligence would have you be. When you start pulling that away and letting your body realign, letting your voice realign, letting your presence realign, become more connected, then we are vibrating at the highest, or perhaps most true frequency that we are meant to vibrate at. And if everyone did that,
Imagine.
yeah, it
Wow.
changes the entire, I mean, it's like we're all, you know, waves in the ocean, or like, I don't know what the word for it is, like we're like, you know, one stitch in the fabric. And if every wave, if every stitch up levels its vibration, we wind up in a completely different reality as a collective.
Yes. And I think that is so apparent to us, especially in this time, like how deeply, deeply interconnected we are. And I think it's so beautifully said, the way that you wove this really articulate, beautiful image of what it means to be a vibrational being, and that there is a core essence that lies within each of us, and it's always been there and we've always known it, but just the process of becoming socialized in the world and having connections with different peers and family and systems and structures and expectations and fears and trauma and all the things can pull us away from that core essence. So how do we get back to that? How do we realign to that is a part of all of our soul's work.
And I think one of the most important things that's coming to me right now to say about that is compassion. Because inevitably, it has certainly been my experience, when I turn my attention to my vibration, what I notice first is where I feel dull, where I feel sad, where I feel guilty, where I feel blocked. Like, I notice those places that aren't vibrating in the way that I want them to, or the way they should. And that is inevitable. Like, that is an inevitable part of me being a human being. So
Right.
if you're here listening to this conversation right now, I'll look at the camera and say this. If you're here looking, I've been looking at Elise, but if you're here listening to this conversation and you notice that you feel dull or lifeless or sad, or we could use the word depressed, like anxious, all the, you're noticing. And notice the part of you that's doing the noticing. the part of you that's doing the noticing is already at your highest vibration and loves the you that is exactly where you are right now unconditionally.
So, so powerful because our highest self is already within us.
Yeah. You're using it to notice.
We're using it to notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also love to ask a bit about what's really alive for you in your own practice with your voice right now.
Thanks for asking. So yeah,
Mm,
it's this singing component. It's
mm,
performing again. Um, uh, I have like my own cocktail of energy workers and astrologers and people that I
yeah.
work with. And it's been over the last couple years, like it just kept coming up in different sessions that I was getting like, Elissa, you're going to sing again. You're going to sing again. You're going to sing for real again. Not just like I've
Yeah.
had these little blips. Yeah, that's what's feeling alive. And I don't totally know how it's taking form, but I do know. So I like currently once a year I teach a class called Release Your Voice, which
Mm,
is a very practically focused class on relieving muscle tension issues that are causing people to have vocal challenges. And so every week right now I'm showing up and teaching that class every Wednesday, and it's astonishing to me how, as I keep going further down the road of my own practice and like starting to sing again, how much more deeply it informs my own teaching as well. So
mm.
um, yeah, so I'm coming back to sharing my voice in it's not a new way. It's like for me, it's an ancient way,
Mm.
but
Oh,
it's new.
so powerful.
Thanks.
And I love to ask each of our guests what being more connected means to you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that.